We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Serious commentators and even some politicians are beginning to say that the nation is spiraling out of control under the current administration. While Americans are looking to the southern border as waves of immigration push the public purse to breaking point, inflation moves further out of control. The Omicron variant prompts more restrictions across the world. One wonders what President Biden's, and indeed the rest of the government on both sides of the divide, priorities actually are. Well, it seems that selling cars for Elon Musk, setting up UFO task forces, and fundraising of Supreme Court cases are the order of the day. And all those other concerns? Well, according to the government, you're just looking at things the wrong way. Winston Churchill once said, "You'll never reach your destination if you stop and throw stones at every dog that barks." What is Joe Biden's ultimate destination for the United States? And how many defenseless dogs will be hurt along the way? Welcome to Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. On today's special show, we're going to be discussing why the Pentagon is setting up a new department to check out unidentified aerial phenomena, or UFOs as we used to call them, how Transport Secretary Pete Buttigieg found himself in the role of salesman for the electric vehicle industry, and why he's likely to fail. Tim Donnell will be joining us for the flagship Say What show, finding the most wacky and damnable sound bites from the bizarre world of politics and the media. And let's not forget, abortion is up before the Supreme Court. We'll be hearing the bell toll for 50 years of Roe v. Wade. All this and a whole lot more on Liberty Nation Radio. I'd like to say a special thank you to our listeners in Arlington, Virginia on WWRC 570 AM. Thank you for tuning in and being part of the team. Remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. Unidentified aerial phenomena, or UFOs as they were once known, are causing a stir yet again in Washington, D.C., or as Liberty Nation author and former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense Controller Dave Patterson wrote in a recent article, unidentified aerial phenomena have landed at the Pentagon. Now, why this sudden renewed interest in the field of UFOs? And what does it imply about what was once considered the realm of tin foil hat wearers? Welcome back to the show, Dave.
Thank you, Mark. And as you notice, I don't have my tinfoil hat on.
We did discuss this. It's just come back from the cleaners, so it's not quite dry yet. So, Dave, unidentified aerial phenomena, UFOs, why are they making news in the swamp yet again?
Well, because at the end of November, the Defense Department, it was directed by Congress, established this new office within the Department of Defense, and it's called, are you ready? Airborne Object Identification and Management Synchronization Group, or in polite circles, we call that the AOI-MSG, not to be confused with the meat tenderizer.
Absolutely. Also illegal in some countries, that particular tenderizer.
That's correct. You know, it has an interesting mission, and that it's designed to, or set into being, to identify, detect, attribute objects of interest. You know, but only in special use airspace.
Okay.
And
special use airspace being?
Military operational areas, the airspace over Washington, D.C., the airspace over London, anything that is regulated by the air traffic control and designated as special use airspace. So it's only in that rather limited space that they're interested, and they're also supposed to mitigate any appropriate or associated threats. It's not clear to me how they do that, but you know, they're bureaucrats. So
is it possible that mitigating threats here could also mean dissemination of information, or as we like to call it, propaganda?
Well, they don't tell you what that means exactly. It could be that, or possibly attempting to capture one of these things, or shoot it down, or do something to as they say, to mitigate any associated threats. And it replaces the Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon Task Force, a much less unwieldy name, I might add. That was set up back in August of 2020.
Okay, it seems to me there's two lines of thinking here, Dave. The first is that these are what the traditionalists in the field think. They're crafts from outer space. And the other, perhaps more mainstream acceptable view is that they're foreign tech that the US just can't fathom. Now, where does the Pentagon fall on this issue? And if it is foreign tech, does that suggest that other nations are, and we're presuming China here, I guess, other nations have such technological advantage that all US warfare models have just become useless?
Well, it appears that the Pentagon would like to dismiss the former as unlikely and is very fearful of the latter. But having said that, overcoming, what has been traditionally stumbling blocks in the laws of physics, that moves in fits and starts. And it's highly unlikely that either Russia or China could suddenly have this immense leap to allow objects moving at the speeds that are attributed to the reported sightings.
It's also it's not just the speeds either, it's the ability to maneuver and turn.
Maneuvering at very high Gs.
Okay, so what's the political view of UAPs at the moment?
Oddly enough, even in today's highly charged partisan atmosphere, this appears to be a bipartisan issue. I mean, folks like Senator Marco Rubio, a Republican, as well as Harry Reid, former leader of the Senate, a Democrat. So you have, it really is a bipartisan issue. And what I believe their point is, and I think this is an admirable point, and that is, if these things are flying around, do they represent a hazard to airlines, military operations? And I think that their point is we need to answer that question.
Okay, so many presidents and presidential contenders have promised to offer what's known in the field as full disclosure on UFO or UAP information that's held by the government when, if they're elected. But it never seems to happen.
Well, I think that the explanation may be twofold. First, disclosure of information which is not satisfying is, that there are hundreds of sightings, and we can discuss those, the where, the when, etc. We don't know what they are, and but we're going to continue to study them. Well, that's an answer that's not very satisfying, but that's the answer that they're kind of stuck with. The second part is a little more tricky. And for them to go into detail with some of the military sightings particularly could expose sensitive technical means by which the sightings were made, and they're not going to want to do that very readily.
One of the things that's overlooked is that although freedom of information requests are legally enforceable, when the government enters into a partnership with a private company, like a public-private initiative, these records become no longer available because they're a proprietary domain of the companies. Is it possible that the federal government is purposely working with the private sector?
The government is going to do what it has to do to get to the objective that it has. And but as far as I know, that hasn't happened. And quite frankly, I think that, believe it or not, the government has been pretty forthcoming with what they're doing. And they're quite willing to admit they have no idea what these things are. But they're very quick to establish a bureaucratic office that will detect, identify, and attribute, as well as mitigate any appropriate threats.
Dave Patterson, thank you ever so much.
Thank you, Mark. It's always good to be with you.
Later in the show, we have Tim Donner hosting a special Say What segment, and Scott Cosenza digging deep into the abortion case up before the Supreme Court, the facts you won't hear in the legacy media. But coming up next, we try to figure out why Pete Buttigieg is acting like a car salesman for the EV industry, rather than Transport Secretary for the United States. Don't touch that dial. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Who are we? We are Americans that believe in liberty. We are a project of the nonprofit One Generation Away. We are patriots who apply the founding principles to the issues of today.
And they keep moving the goalposts on us.
We are educators and commentators who love America and the Constitution. Who are we? We are Liberty Nation.